the Legends of Iron. I'm Jon Andersen. Meet my co-hosts, Nick Best and Akim Williams. We're going to have some amazing guests on the show. Buckle up tight, because we're going to be talking about the shit you're not supposed to be talking about. We're going to be discussing anything and everything it takes to become a Legend of Iron.
Legends of Iron is brought to you by Muscle Mints. Muscle Mints is the creator of Carnivore, pure beef protein icing. Beef builds muscle, and Carnivore is the world's #1 selling beef protein. And don't forget to try our new Carnivore flavor, Rocket Pop.
Oh, damn. Whoa, this is it right here.
Wow, this is protein? Delicious.
This is too good to be protein. Woo, we about to change the game with this one.
You're gonna love it. Welcome to another edition of Legends of Iron. I am Jon Andersen. With me always my partners in crime, Nick Best and Akim Williams. We have got a killer show for you today. This guy is going to help us understand a whole lot of misconceptions that go on when it comes to the way that we eat. He's a doctor. We've all had, I guess you'd say, interesting experiences with doctors, especially in America, with all of the changes that medical has gone through. We've all had goods, bads, and the otherwise, but let me tell you, if every doctor was like this guy, we would be in a good place. Dr. Shawn Baker, welcome to the show. How are you, my brother?
John, I'm good, man. I'm real good. Life is good. I'm generally always good. So like I said, it's a pleasure to be here and to see with you guys. I mean, you guys are got some phenomenally strong people in the room.
Well, Doc, you're back in your prime. You're 280 some pounds. You're one of the strong ones too. Come on now, to give yourself some credit.
Yeah, I mean, I put my time in, and I still appreciate it. And I think the development, cultivation, and maintenance of strength and lean mass is incredibly healthy. You talk about, how to have a healthy population. The fact, it's interesting thing. We live in the arguably the wealthiest, one of the wealthiest countries, one of the most resource, intensive countries in the world. We have access to everything technologically, and we have a nation of sick, obese, disabled, people. It shouldn't be that way. We should have, everybody should be, a bunch of beasts.
Happy and healthy, baby. Yeah. Happy, at very least, happy and healthy. What do you think?
Right, exactly. No, absolutely.
Well, on that level, I know you're a huge advocate of carnivore, and I know that you've had a lot of experience with, basically helping people go from point A, which is usually not a very good place, to point B, which is a really life-changing experience, into a much better life, which is point B. Share with us some of your experiences with how changing someone's diet using meat can be beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, first we have to recognize that diet has a role in health, and I think most of us clearly do, but there's physicians out there that literally will tell you that diet has nothing to do with it. And that's some of the problems we have with this. You even have gastroenterologists that say that, well, diet has nothing to do with your gastrointestinal issues. And you're like, are you really went to medical school?
Why did they get a degree? Somebody gave them the degree then.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I went to the same school as these guys. And, there's some point where you got to where's the common sense in this stuff going on?
Yeah.
And so, when we accept that nutrition plays a role, and not just a role, but a major role, I think it has a huge role in just about every, certainly chronic disease out there, whether it goes from, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, but even mental health disorders and autoimmune diseases, gut issues, arthritis, even all these things are dramatically affected by what we eat, which makes sense. And, as people, I know guys that are into lifting and bodybuilding, they know what their diet is. I mean, every decision you make about what you put in your mouth has a goal, which is usually performance related, body composition or whatever. And I think that, my experience has been, let's just see what actually works, and not just sort of, and this is the other thing where you guys are the guys that are pushing the envelope, the experimenters, and you're pushing the edges of human physiology. There's a lot to be learned there. You can't pay people in a lab. It's not even ethical what you do in many cases to put somebody on a experiment. Let's have this guy repeatedly lift monstrous amount of weights over time and eat ridiculous amounts of protein you wouldn't get that through an ethics review board a lot of times, but then you have the people that do this, and you can learn a lot from this. And I learned a lot from my patients. And, just by listening to those guys and saying, okay, let's see what happens when you do this. And you get a result that is like not what you expect based on what you've been taught. You've got to either say, well, either I was taught wrong or this person's a liar, or, we get the same thing, the accusation where you must be lying or something like that. So I've seen with, meat in particular, and again, I'm a proponent of a meat-based diet or carnivorous diet. I don't think everybody needs to do that. I've never said that. I think where I really want to push back is people saying the meat is bad for us. Meat is something that's going to kill us. I mean, it's just complete. It's literally garbage. I mean, it's literally science that would suggest that is so weak. And yet it's so, there's people that have different biases, whether they are sort of animal rights people or they are, people that, we look at industry. I mean, it's a big bad world out there. There's people like make a lot of money off of sick people, whether it's the pharmaceutical companies or the people that are pushing out all the processed junk food that is just everywhere. And so when you start to sort of really look at it from a 50,000 foot view, you can say, well, these people are, just go in a grocery store and see what people put in their grocery carts and look what they look like. It's as simple as that.
Oh, it's
hard.
bad.
You don't go in there. When I go to a grocery store and somebody's got steak and eggs and chicken breast, and that's most of their grocery cart, I'm looking at them and they're usually going to be some big jack dude. I mean, that's the reality of the matter. And I think, so we know what puts on muscle, and it's interesting. I know there's this push for plant-based this and that, but I mean, there's no Mr. Olympias that are on a vegan diet. We know even if you can meticulously take protein isolates from plant source and match up all the leucine and all the amino acids, you're still leaving out the fact that cholesterol has a role in muscle protein.
Absolutely.
And numbers show that the cholesterol is anabolic. I mean, you can go back to guys like Rhonda and these other guys that were talking about this in the 1940s and 50s. I mean, this stuff has already been figured out. We're just trying to catch the scientists up. And as anybody's met at the doctor, and you're looking at a doctor and he's some scrawny guy or some guy with a big old belly telling you how to be healthy, and you're like, wait a minute, dude. It doesn't make sense, right? So, that's just kind of an overview. But I mean, there's specifics. I mean, there's a lot of cholesterol is going to kill you, red meat is going to cause cancer. We can sort of look at all the data and show where that doesn't actually hold up. If you guys want to look at that, I mean, I can
talk to us a little bit about that, Doc. I mean, clearly, because you hit on the head. One of the biggest misconceptions is, red meat's bad. Red meat's going to kill you. It's going to give you this. You're the doctor. The studies. Lay that stuff out in factual and facts for us.
Right. Well, I mean, I think just if we look at, for instance, what is my cholesterol? Is diet going to affect cholesterol or not? And, in some cases it does. Some people will eat a bunch of meat and eggs and their cholesterol will go up, and that'll set off alarm bells. And the question is that a reason for concern or not? And I think many physicians still don't know what to do. Most of them just reflexively say, well, I'm so used to dealing with obese people that are pre-diabetic, that are hypertensive, that are chronically inflamed, that can't do anything. And in those people, they just plug in my formula. And I'm going to put you on a statin. I'm going to tell you to go eat cardboard. And what we see is, when we look at, there was a huge, literally the largest study that's ever been done in Korea, done in 2019. It looked at 12.8 million people, and it looked at what their cholesterol level was and whether they were going to die or not. And, the standard physician answer is if your cholesterol is total cholesterol is above 190 or 200, they want you on a low-fat diet. They want you on a statin. Well, what this study found is that 12.8 million people, the average between 210 and 250 were the people that lived the longest. And if it went much above that, it made very little difference. But if it went significantly below that, you started seeing people drop dead a lot quicker. And so low cholesterol is actually more problematic. That same exact data was shown, I think, in 2021 on the NHANES data. NHANES is one of the largest databases in the United States. Same sort of thing. Low cholesterol predicts less likelihood to live. Higher levels of cholesterol, you do better. And at the very, very high levels, it only makes a slight negative effect. And that's general population. That's not lean guys that are strong and healthy. So that's probably even more skewed that way. We know that, in 2020, the Journal of American Cardiology and Journal of American Medical Association came out with a study it flat out said, look, red meat, eggs, dairy, chocolate do not cause heart disease. The saturated fat in those do not cause heart disease. And it's this sort of myth about saturated fat. If I look at what's in beef, there's saturated fat in there, but the main fat in beef is monounsaturated fat. I mean, it's about 48% mono and about 42% saturated, and the rest is a little polyunsaturated fat. And so, and beef is just not a glob of saturated fat. I mean, obviously, there's very bioavailable protein, plus all the carnitine and the choline and the creatine and the, carnosine and the taurine and anserine and all these other beneficial products. Beef has something like 50,000 unique nutritional compounds, and they're not found in plants. And the other thing is, we hear this, I got to get my phytonutrients. Well, guess what? When a cow's out there eating everything, I mean, they're not just eating grass or eating weeds or eating fobs or eating flowers. They have a much more diverse diet than any human could possibly have, because we can't tolerate all the plants that they can. Those phytonutrients actually accumulate in their meat and fat. And so you're eating that, you're getting those things in a large degree anyway. And so it's a large fallacy. And then when we look at, like, for instance, the other things, red meat causes colon cancer, right? And so this is a big one we always hear about. So first of all, if we look at the risk factors for colorectal cancer, for instance, some of the biggest risk factors are obesity, and then it's going to be hyperinsulinemia, chronic inflammation, visceral fat. All these things have a huge effect on colorectal cancer risk, whereas red meat had this tiny, tiny, tiny increase, and everybody wants to focus on that. And I'm like, well, why don't you focus on me being lean? If I eat a diet that's high in protein, high in meat, and I get leaner, and my diabetes goes away, and my inflammation goes away, and my visceral fat goes away, my blood pressure normalizes, and my inflammation goes down, which consistently happens, by the way, on people eating meat-based diets, I've lowered my risk for colorectal cancer and heart disease and basically everything else tremendously. Why aren't we focusing on that? Because it's like, people can't think of, it's like if you're lifting and you're saying, well, the only thing I need to do to get really big is to do a couple biceps curls, and I'm going to have a huge squat. It's like, no, you got to do all these other.
That's a great way to put it. That's a great way to put it.
You can't just look at one isolated factor and assume that's, and that's in isolation. So, I mean, it's just so reductionist ways to look at things. When we look at, for instance, Women's Health Initiative study 2021 looked at the biggest risk factors for heart disease. And guess where LDL cholesterol fell in the top 10? It's like at the bottom. The biggest things were diabetes. Diabetes, number one. If you're going to die of heart disease, you're likely going to be diabetic. Then obesity was up there. Hypertension was up there. Prediabetes, metabolic syndrome, smoking, family history. Those are all way above what your LDL cholesterol was. And so again, you got to put all these numbers into the risk pool and say, which ones can I move? And if I move them all these in a good direction, and my LDL cholesterol goes up a little bit, my overall risk has come down significantly.
Yeah.
So, that's like 1980s medicine that people are still practicing today. I'm just shocked at 2022 when I tell people I eat 3 or 4 pounds of red meat every day, the first question they say is, what's your cholesterol? And I'm saying that's the wrong question. The right question should be, what's your heart health? Because that's what we want to know. And when I've had mine examined, I've had heart scans, nothing, perfectly clear arteries. That's the question you need to turn around and say, you're asking the wrong question. When you ask the right question, you get into more nuance. And I, like I said, it's just, doctors have been trained. I just put this tweet out today. It's like, imagine if you spent 4 years in medical school, 4 years in undergraduate degree, and anywhere between 3 to 8 years in your specialty training, 16, sometimes 15, 16 years of training. And then all you do all day is mindlessly write prescriptions based on an algorithm that was created by a drug company and pushed out to, patient advocacy groups, governing organizations, like the ADA and American Heart Association. They're all getting money from these drug companies, and they tell the physicians what to do. Just like, okay, my patient comes in, he's got high cholesterol, boom, check mark, boom, and then you get paid more for doing that. Which is
so Doc, are we kind of skirting on the whole idea of why we have an FDA, a Food and Drug Administration? Why are those two connected? Why do they need to communicate? Almost like the food is creating the problems so that the drugs can cure the problems?
Well, I mean, I don't know that the drugs are even curing the problem, but the food.
Well, let me rephrase. Forgive me. Yes, that's what they say. When in actuality, it's just a great way to make money. Sell cheap food and sell a bunch of drugs. Get people sick from food, and then sell them a bunch of drugs with the idea it's going to fix their problem, but really it's just a rhetorical downward spiral.
Yeah, I don't know when the FDA was created. I can't tell you that, but I do know, like, for instance, their drug approval budget, 65% of the money they get to approve drugs is paid for by drug companies. It's called regulatory capture. I mean, you literally have the fox guarding the chicken. I mean, it's like literally they are paying you to regulate things, and if you don't get it in their favor, you don't get paid. I mean, it's the conflict of interest is immense. I mean, honestly.
Well, that's what's going on with the NIH now too. The same thing's going on with the NIH. Same thing. I just saw a thing the other day on the NIH and how a bunch of their money comes from these drug companies as well. So sorry, keep going.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing is, I did an interesting podcast yesterday with one of the primary pharmacy regulators in the UK. And he's discussed it with it too. And he basically says, look, these drug companies, not only do they not publish negative results, so they'll do a study and it turns out shitty and people get hurt, they won't publish it. They won't even tell anybody about that. But the studies that they do publish, no one even gets access to the raw data. They just say, this is our summary. Even the peer reviewers at the journals don't have access to their data because it is proprietary corporate data that is protected, copyrighted, oh my God. So no one knows what's going out there. And so what they publish, and I guess in the last 10 years, interesting, he told me in the last 10 years, they've changed the law, so they have to be more open about it. But since that law has passed place, there's been 0 studies from drug companies showing that cholesterol lowering medications make a difference because they're not hiding their data anymore. And so they have to be open and forthcoming about it. So they can't show that anymore. So it's a like I said, I know this is off top and maybe it's not exactly what you guys wanted to talk about, but this is something that people need to be aware of. I mean, you can't, when people are saying follow the science, trust the science, you have to realize that the science is extremely corrupted. And it's
and just so you know, Doc, this is what we want you to talk about, all the stuff. Yeah. Everybody, because you're a doctor, you got the background, you got the history, you know where to look, and for you to expose a lot of this stuff, so many people have the wrong information, but because they heard it from wherever, they think it's fact. And what we're trying to do is help. You're basically coming on here to help everybody understand what's really going on. So this is perfect.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, I would say, this is something that's easy to verify. People can tell me all kinds of things and I have no way to verify this. I mean, you can tell me the planet's getting warm. I don't know. I'm not an expert. I just look out the window. I'm not able to verify that. I can't tell you if the ocean temperature is warmer. I have to rely on people. But what I don't have to rely on is a scientist to tell me if I feel better, if I'm healthier, if I'm leaner, if I'm strong. I can verify that myself. And I think that's what we have to realize. You can look in the mirror and you should be able to tell if you're healthy. And I think people have been sort of bamboozled to believe that you have to have this laboratory profile or this gut. It's all this stuff in there. It's just like, in the end of the day, what actually matters to me, and is probably more valid. And it's kind of, as an orthopedic, I used to replace people's knees and hips and shoulders and fix broken bones. And it's kind of interesting when we look at the orthopedic surgical literature on knee replacements, and we'll say, yeah, we do a great job. 95% of the people do well and they're great and they don't have any pain. Then if you look at the literature and the pain literature, it's something that doesn't turn out that is quite as rosy. It's like 40% of the people still have significant pain. And it's just like, who are you listening to? And if you're not listening to your patients, if you're not listening to who you're supposed to be taking care of and, sort of honoring what is important to them and not what's important to you. And I got to tell you, it's like physicians these days, particularly primary care, if you have 80% of your patients and you get them on cholesterol lowering medications, if their cholesterol is above this point, you get an attaboy, you get paid more. So you're incentivized financially to do things that may or may not be something that your patient wants to do or even in their best interest. So it's, you got to be, unfortunately, I wish I could say as a physician, there's nothing, everybody's above board. And, by and large part, most physicians are good people. They're smart people. They're trying to help people. They want to do their best, but they're in a system that doesn't really allow for that anymore. And some of them kind of recognize this they're kind of fuzzy about it. And maybe they don't feel too good about it, but they're like, the system's too hard. And I get that. I mean, it's like, you're tilting at windmills, it's a big system to go against. But I think, like I said, you guys know Mark, and he interviewed me about 4 or 5 years ago. Now I've interacted with him several times. And early on, I said, Mark, you've got a platform, you've got a decently sized voice. and he was talking, and great. He's, strength and all that stuff is important, but he started to talk a little bit more health. And I said, that's what we need. Because we need people like you guys and myself. There's nothing wrong with you talking about, health and getting healthier. And I know, John, you're getting people jacked and ripped. And I think that's a great service to the world. Better looking people are nice to look at anyway, better place. But at the same time, you're actually positively impacting their health. And I think that's
because that's one of the things I tell them right away. I say, look, you're going to get your abs. You're going to get your big bench. But hear me loud and clear. This stuff is nothing more than a side effect of you getting healthy first. The body performs 10 times better when it's healthy first. And unfortunately, most people and even coaches are happy to sacrifice health for a look or health for a performance. Well, that's very short-lived because it only lasts and then it doubles back. So when a person knows how to make themselves healthy, they're going to perform better, they're going to look better, they're going to feel better. And that's one of the things that, when you and I connected on your show the first time, Doc, we just, almost instantly connected with that same principle with, look, let's get you healthy first. Then you're going to get in shape just as kind of a byproduct. And that was that for me. It was like, boom, man, where's this guy been all my life? We see the same things, so.
Yeah. You're putting into practice what I think the science shows. And I don't know what, Akim, if you're probably eating, I imagine you're eating a lot of food, a lot of meat and stuff like that. I would imagine, all you guys are super strong guys. And I think it's pretty clear that's what's doing what it is. But at the same time, you have a lot of influence over people. It's like we have to sort of, because we're being directed in a certain direction. It's not a good place. I think that, even our superheroes are becoming watered down. If you look at superheroes,
that's the truth, though.
I have nothing against Robert Downey Jr. and Iron Man. He's a good guy, but he's not a superhero dude. It's just kind of like, he's kind of maybe that's the thing, we're an everyman. But I think what you guys have achieved, most people can achieve with the right time, to some degree, or at least to a degree of that, with the right amount of effort and time and proper nutrition and hard work. Yeah. So, it's something that we have to sort of continue to, it's like it's like going to war, quite honestly. We're literally in a war. And I look at it not for me so much. I'm not going to fall prey to the garbage stuff that's out there. I've already figured this stuff out. But our kid, I know John, you've got some kids. I don't know what the rest of you guys, but you look at your kids and you're like, what do I want my kids to grow up in? And then, God willing, to have grandchildren, and, what are we leaving these kids? And if we're turning everybody into, and it's not just everybody needs to be jacked, but it's like, it's more than that. It's, being just physically fit, even if you're in shape, it has such a huge impact on our health, mental health. We've got so many people that are depressed and suicidal and don't know what the hell is going on. And it's accelerating at rapid rates. We're just watching this like snowball, it's kind of like, it's not like, it's just the next generation. I remember, my parents, their grandparents were yelling at them for shaking their hips like Elvis Presley. Oh, look at how bad that is. But it's like accelerating to such a degree where, people are going to be plugged into the matrix, the metaverse, where they're just staring blankly at a screen for 12 hours a day, and they can't even function in society. So it's like,
well, think about it though. Back in that day, where the kids were getting in trouble for shaking their hips, there wasn't a lot of fast food restaurants.
Yeah.
No.
And most people ate homemade meals. And when you cook at home, you do better. Where in each generation since, they're eating out more, they go to restaurants. You drive by, these fast food restaurants at 6:00 at night, and their drive-thrus are packed.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's how
and
you could have cooked the steak.
Whether or not healthy. And the time you're waiting in that line for 15 minutes, you could have cooked steak and had some rice. It's real simple stuff. It doesn't take that long.
Yeah, I had seen an article talking about the fact that breakfast cereal was going out of favor with like Generation Z and the millennials, and I thought, well, that's kind of good because breakfast cereal is probably not the best thing you can have. I'd just eat eggs for breakfast. But the reason wasn't because what you thought it was. The reason was this: The reason was because a bowl of cereal was too much work. You had to actually pour it in the bowl.
Oh my God.
You had to rinse the dish. So they want to just open a package, shove it in the mouth, and that's what they want to do. They don't even have time to make a bowl of cereal. I mean, that's how bad it's gotten. And so, I mean, my kids learn how to cook. I mean, it's like it's an essential survival skill. I mean, it's like we're being, we're going to be like these eyeless fish. Like there's fish that they live under with there's no light, so they lose eyes. They don't have eyes anymore. They don't need them, and they're going to be like kids that don't even know how to. I don't know. They don't know how to do anything.
So Doug, let me ask you a couple of questions in terms of obviously when it comes to getting big and strong, bodybuilding, powerlifting, strongman, all of the iron umbrella, so to speak. One of the big things that people love to say is, I don't want to hurt my organs by eating too much protein. Talk to us about that. I know we've talked about that when I was on your show, but please help our audience understand how misleading that statement is.
Yeah, I was hoping you weren't going to ask me how to get big and strong, because I'm saying you guys figured it out. But I mean, when it comes to one of the biggest myths out there, and I just did a video on this today, is one thing is protein's going to harm your kidneys. We hear that all the time, and it's kind of interesting. There's a bodybuilder you probably guys know, Milas Sarcev, just put a Instagram post about, I've been eating 450 to 550 grams of protein every day for 20 years, and I've recorded it. And I got nothing wrong, right? And so when you look in the literature, and Jose Antonio, who's a researcher in Florida, I think he's out in St. Pete, but he did a study and he took bodybuilder, young guys eating, something like 400, 500, 600 grams of protein a day. It was something like 4 grams per kilo. I mean, probably not that shocking to you, but for most people would freak out about that. Mm-hmm. And he showed clearly there was no change, no negative effect on kidney function. There was no negative effect on liver function. That's a 2-year study. Stu Phillips, who is regarded as one of the top protein researchers in the world. He's one of these, the guru guy. And he did a huge systematic review on renal function and higher protein diets and saw zero evidence that protein harms your kidneys. Now, what often happens, and physicians make this mistake a lot of times, is that what they'll do is they'll see somebody goes into renal failure. They'll have, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4 kidney failure. And they start spilling all this protein, and they just think, well, that's bad, so you shouldn't eat protein because your kidneys are spilling protein. But it's not because you're eating protein that's happening. It's because it's been damaged from other things, likely just complete garbage food people are eating, the diabetes and on and on. That's what's happening. And so, I mean, and there was a study in the 1980s. Dr. Brenner did some studies on rats, and they showed that if you feed rats super high protein diets, that they will have some kidney issues. But again, guess what? We're not rats. We have very different physiology on that. The interesting thing about high protein diets, generally, and I've actually, David Unwin's a researcher out of the UK. He's a family physician, and he did a longitudinal analysis on patients he was putting on lower carbohydrate, higher protein diets, and they were actually reversing their kidney disease. Their kidney function got better. And the other thing I think you need to be aware of, and most physicians aren't aware of this, is when you go to the doctor and they'll draw like a standard chemistry panel. And it's got your sodium, your potassium, your calcium. They'll have your albumin, and they'll have something called a GFR, glomerular filtration rate, and they'll have something called a creatinine, right? Not creatine, but creatinine. And creatinine, typically in guys that are big and strong and lift a lot of times the creatinine is high. Oh, yeah. And there's a formula. It's just an estimate formula. It'll get your GFR, and it'll say your GFR is low, and that's associated with kidney failure. And for some of you guys will notice it'll say African American on there, and the number is always about 15% higher. And the reason for that is they say, well, we know African Americans tend to have a little more muscle mass, and therefore we expect that number to be higher. But really, it applies to anybody that's got a lot of muscle, anybody that's got big, strong muscle. And the problem with that study is, if the physician isn't clued into this, and most of them aren't, they'll mistakenly think you have kidney problems. And what you should be doing is using a different test called cystatin C, and it's a test that doesn't care about how much protein you ingest. It doesn't care about how much protein's being turned over. If you got big muscles, if you have big muscles, protein's turning over more frequently. About 1% to 2% of our muscle is turned over every day, and we have to continually, kind of take care of that. So if you're training real hard, you guys are all familiar with the concept of rhabdomyolysis. So when these guys that do these crazy CrossFit workouts, and their muscles break down, they shut down their kidneys because they clog it up with myoglobin. But when you're training hard, when you have a lot of muscle, your creatinine is going to be high. Just expect to be high. Same with your blood urea nitrogen. And so that's not an indicator that you have kidney failure necessarily. You just need to know what test to order. But yeah, I mean, protein meat is not going to harm your organs. It's interesting, when you get a nephrectomy, like if you donate one of your kidneys, guess what happens to your other kidney? It gets a lot bigger. It actually grows. And that's actually a good thing. We saw that when a woman gets pregnant, her kidneys grow because they're having to filter more and more stuff. And to say that because my kidneys are working and getting bigger and stronger, I guess you can use that word, is a bad thing. Is crazy. It's like saying, well, my heart muscle got stronger because I exercised. My muscles got stronger. If you're afraid of having bigger biceps, then you should be afraid of having bigger kidneys. And in fact, when we look at older people as they get older in life, if you take a CT scan or an MRI of a whole body CT scan of an old person, you see when they get all decrepit, everything shrinks. Their kidneys start to shrink, their skin shrinks, their bones get narrow, their muscles shrink, their brain shrinks. Everything is shrinking down. So you want organs to be robust and big, not shriveled up, and so it's kind of this belief that, well, you don't want your kidneys to work hard because they'll get stronger. I mean, that's really what's going on. It's like, it's the same argument, I shouldn't, because there's some people think we shouldn't be stressing our body with exercise. All that exercise is going to, you're going to get a bad back if you deadlift or if you squat or something like that, which, you guys is totally wrong.
I mean, that's also, that's for the people that we've got this society of dormant people. So when they're not used to moving and then they decide one day their New Year's resolution, they're going to go to the gym and try to deadlift and they hurt their back. Okay, well, let's go figure. But you spent the last 3 years in your recliner. You decide to go deadlift, you hurt yourself. Of course, we got a problem. But Doc, I love what you have to say because I've been eating 4+ pounds, and this is a cooked weight. So obviously you do that and you do the math. I was probably closer to 6. Now it's more like 6 of a cooked weight. So between 4 to 6 pounds of chicken or beef, sometimes fish, since 1992. And I have my last checkup, my kidneys are perfect. So, but it's one thing for me to say it. It's another thing when somebody like you, who's got the medical history that knows the studies, say it. So for all of you guys out there listening, don't listen to me anymore. Listen to the doctor. Doc Baker, he's got it down. He knows exactly what the studies are. So I thank you so much for explaining that, because that's such a huge misconception. People say, I don't want to hurt my organs. I don't want to eat too much protein. Well, I always say, how about let's get rid of the processed food, because the processed food is what's fucking up your organs. You agree with that, Doc?
Yeah, 100%. And I will put one caveat to there. There's no reason to eat 500 grams of protein a day if you're not working out, though. I mean, and I think this is where I think, eating whole foods is better than protein powder, because you get a satiety feedback. I'm not going to sit there and eat 6 pounds of meat and not train. I mean, I'm just not going to be able to do it. I mean, like I said, I can eat 600 grams of protein powder. It's very easy to throw, 5 scoops of protein powder and mix it in a bunch of water or milk, and you can suck that, and you can get 250 grams of pop and do that a couple times a day without the satiety. So you've got to be, and this goes back to something I said earlier. And John, I know you're a big fan of eggs and whole foods and stuff like that, but I mean, the cholesterol has a role there. Cholesterol is not to be demonized. I mean, we need cholesterol for so many functions, and it has it just flat out does have a beneficial role for muscle building. I mean, it's clear. I mean,
so most people don't understand what those functions are. Can you explain what cholesterol's function is so that people understand? Because that's another thing that they just don't know what it's supposed to do. Yeah. So cholesterol, first of all, cholesterol is represented every single cell membrane in our body. So every single cell membrane in our body. In fact, 25% of our cholesterol is occupied in our brain. I mean, our brain utilizes basically 25% of the cholesterol. Our brain is a very fatty tissue itself, but I mean, cholesterol is a precursor, structural hormone for all kinds of hormones. There's vitamin D, whether it's progesterone, like pregnenolone, DHEA, androstenedione, testosterone. All these things, our sex hormones and other hormones are made with cholesterol. Cholesterol has a role in immune function. We know, we just went through this pandemic. People that had low cholesterol had a worse outcome across the board. If you had low cholesterol, you're more likely to be hospitalized, more likely to die. Cholesterol has a big role in immune function, like hormone production. It has structural implications. I mean, it has a protective role in our gut. I mean, every
bodily function, cholesterol has a role in that. And so to, minimize it either through diet or drug usage, it's a statin drug or one of these PCSK9 inhibitors, which is a new drug, you are likely putting yourself, you're compromising your health with this. And I mean, it's just maddening that we continue to use that as a paradigm as physicians. I mean, we're really just harming people, quite honestly.
So let's talk about, like, for example, 1980s, you had a different tone, a different look in terms of what was socially acceptable as based on what your average American looked like. Like, for example, you talked about the superheroes and stuff like that. Yeah. Fast forward to 2022.
Right.
You see what socially.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're seeing, we're just seeing a Sports Illustrated swimsuit model cover girl is obese. I just put that up. You've got that. And I mean, there's nothing, and I want to say fat people are not bad people. We should not say anything's wrong with a fat person. They're not a bad person, but being fat is bad. I mean, and I want to, and I know there's a lot of strong, big guys that they gain too much weight, but I mean, ultimately it's going to be a problem. But I mean, if you look at a beach picture from the 1970s and 80s, I mean, there's not a lot of obese people. There's a few. I mean, when I grew up, I grew up in the 70s. Nick, I don't know. I was born in '67, so I think we're about the same age. And John, I know you're not far behind us. When I remember I was like a 9-year-old kid, and I watched Bruce Jenner win the Olympics, and I said, "Oh man, that's so cool!" I was excited. He won the decathlon. He inspired me. He doesn't inspire me anymore, but I mean, I was excited, and I organized the neighborhood Olympics, and we had 4 times around the block was a marathon, and we had the sprint, and I got an old mattress. It was a high jump, and we shot-putted rocks, and I got all the kids in the community. It was we had 10 or 12 kids, but we had the fat kid from the neighborhood. I mean, he was known as the fat kid because he was the only one. I mean, and and I'm sure he's a good kid and everything like that. I remember his name was Steve Smith. Hopefully he's not. There's a lot of Steve Smiths out there, so they won't offend anybody. But I mean, that was a rarity, and now it's every day. In fact, 20%. I think 20% of our kids right now are overweight, and it's growing more. We've got 75% of our population right now falls in overweight. We're at 45% obesity rate. We're going to soon hit 50 by 2030. That's becoming the norm. And it doesn't need to be that way. And the fact that we've got Target mannequins that are now obese, we've got swimsuit models, we got Cosmo. I mean, again, I don't think these people should be demonized, but at the same time, if you don't sort of say this is not something we should be glorifying, it's a real problem. And I think people are afraid to say anything about it because they're going to get pushback. And how dare you point out the fact that the emperor has no clothes? I mean, I think we just have to.
And let's just talk about forget overweight or not. Let's just talk health, because the obese are going to be unhealthy. So let's just forget what they look like and talk about health. Well, but I agree with you 100%. It's somehow it's becoming more accepted.
And it's not just obesity as a problem, but it's also frailty. We've got the other side of the coin. It's not just as skinny as possible, and we've got just as much of that, quite honestly. And with this plant-based movement and all this stuff, we have people we know, like for instance, plant-based diets are associated with higher fracture rates. We clearly know that there's about a 43% increase in fracture rates of all causes if you're on a plant-based diet. We know there's higher mental health issues. I mean, that's clearly multiple studies have shown
higher
that.
Suicide too, correct, Dr. Baker?
Violence, suicidality, depression, anxiety, all those things are occurring, and then there's a number of other problems with that. Higher rates for hemorrhagic strokes. There's lots of things we can talk about with that. But I mean, I think like we mentioned with the superheroes, when it was Arnold and it was Sylvester Stallone and it was, those guys that were just big, strong guys. And now that's being, we're all these toxically masculine men right now, which we're trying to be, just stay in the cage and don't interact in society. But I think, if anything, we need more people that are willing to say strength is a good thing. Nothing wrong with being a strong man. I mean, in fact, that's something you should aspire to. And I think, I know for me, when I'm stronger, I'm just mentally happier. I'm probably less likely to be aggressive or violent when I feel good. I mean, it's just like you feel better. You're generally happier. Granted, people don't walk up to you and mess with you when you're a big guy, but at the same time, even if somebody gives you a hard time, you're more likely to say, hey man, don't worry about it. I'm good. Whereas these people that are sort of sickly and tired, they're going to be more, it's like an injured animal. You know, when you corner an injured animal, they're ferocious, right?
Yeah.
So we have a whole society of people that are walking around. They've got a hair trigger. I mean, we're at a time where everybody's being divided, whether it's through abortion or race or COVID crap. It's just ridiculous.
Politics.
Yeah, politics.
Yeah.
People are, and then you put into that, the fuel to the fire is a crappy diet, and no one's nourished. Their brains aren't being nourished well. It's a bad time. And so these people that are eating well and taking care of themselves, we just need to lift everybody else up and say, hey, look, man, I understand. Come on, we can fix this stuff. And I think we need more men, and I'm going to put it on the men because, this is
more people.
I mean, we're the people that can make a difference, and we should use our platforms to say, hey, look, and all of us have our different particular bent. Hey, there's a fitness side, but from the greater good of society, it's like, look, not only is this going to help you be stronger and whatever that benefits are, but it's helping society as a whole. And I just keep re-sharing that message with as many people who will listen.
Yeah, and it's a great message because when it comes down to it, unfortunately, I don't think the masses understand that most of the food that they're consuming is actually poisoning them. It's really. I mean, when people go shopping and they shop, but basically you got to be healthy, you really got to shop around the outside where everything's refrigerated. You shop on the inside. If you're buying shit in a box or a bag, the odds are it's not going to help you be a healthy person. But unfortunately, there's so much information that supports this, that tells people the wrong shit. So, Doc, I love your message because what you're saying is so true. The problem is it takes somebody like yourself that has the title, a doctor. I can say this shit all day and people think I'm just a big dumb meathead. The big dumb son of a bitch, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He'll be dead tomorrow.
I get that, John, but I mean, that doesn't have to be the case. And I look at guys like Stan, Stan everything that you guys have seen. Stan, he'll put up stuff and he'll just share it. And he's not a scientist, but guess what? People reading those studies, because they don't even know they exist. I mean, if you talk to the average person, I think that the best way to be healthy is a vegan diet because we've had PETA and these people putting out all this propaganda for years, and it's just a number of boots on the ground. I mean, it's whoever gets the message out there, and it's like you guys that know what works for you and what's real, and you just say, hey, Doc Baker showed up a study. Let me reshare that and let my audience know about that. And that's how we sort of metastasize this thing, in a good way to do that. But your point about the food, I mean, if you look at, you're like, well, who the hell eats all this crap in the middle of the supermarket? Well, guess what? It's there for a reason because people buy the hell out of it. And you just got to go look at the grocery cart. See what's there. And so, it's kind of like one of those things. Yeah. I mean, it's in the store because people buy it. And, like I said, when I go to the store, I mean, I just walk back to the damn meat counter. I just go buy half a cow. So my shopping's pretty easy. I'll go in and buy a couple dozen eggs or something. I mean, usually I'm buying like 50 or 60 at a time, which, it's probably not surprising to you guys, but I think
also one of the things that you guys also failed to point out to is basically the cost in terms of eating healthy. Like you go to the supermarket and you buy eggs and meat and stuff like that, it's way more expensive than buying a bunch of junk. So sometimes the cost plays a factor into that too. So
it does. And I think this is a real shame because, when we look at, sort of, impoverished populations, they disproportionately bear the brunt of chronic disease because they just eat the food they can afford, which is really cheap stuff. Yeah. And I think this is something that this is a problem with demonizing meat. And I'll say this, and a lot of people get mad when I say this, but if I go to a fast food restaurant, McDonald's, Wendy's, Burger King, and I just get a burger patty, that's actually a health food. I know people say, fast food, but it's really not a big issue. And that you can find those places in every single place in America. I mean, whether it's the inner city or some rural podunk town, they got McDonald's, or they got a Wendy's or something like that. You could literally go there, and it's literally a loss leader for those companies. McDonald's doesn't make much money on their beef patties. I mean, they make money on people buying the fries and the Coca-Colas and stuff like that. That's their cheap products. They get you in the door with the meat, just like Costco. They get you in the door with the rotisserie chicken, but they lose money on that stuff. So you can literally walk into Burger King or Wendy's. I'll go in there and I'll say, hey, man, you guys sell single burger patties, by themselves? And they say, yeah. And I say, well, what is it? So it's like $1.49. So give me 10 of them. just to negotiate the price up front, because otherwise, you'll come back and they'll try to put, make it a hamburger and you just end up paying 3 times the price. But you could literally do that, and you could get healthy with regard to that. But yes, but most people will see, they've got whatever Oreos on sale for 2 for $1 for, $1.49 for that.
Yeah.
It tastes
2 for $5.
Yeah, it tastes good. That's the thing, and the food companies know it. They've engineered the hell out of it. The Bliss Point and Moskowitz came up in the 70s.
Look at Akim. Look at Akim.
I'm laughing.
He's killing that one. Yeah, he's
I'm laughing because he talked about going to McDonald's and ordering just a burger. Now, fast forward 2000. I think it was 2011. My first bodybuilding show. You want to know what I dieted on?
What was that?
The Subway chicken breast. I would go to the Subway and just get the chicken breast.
Yeah, and that's the thing, these companies, they're losing money on the meat. That's just the model. They get you in the door and they sell you all the other stuff. But if you just say, hey, look, I just want the meat, that's actually generally pretty good. It's a hell of a lot better than going to the grocery store and getting all the garbage. Because that's what most people are doing. And then they're like, well, how dare which always makes me laugh when people are saying, well, you're eating meat and eggs and you're unhealthy. I'm like, well, wait a minute, you're eating cookies and you're eating soda pop and all this crap and telling me how I'm going to be unhealthy when, and you look at you and look at me and it's just like, it's a big difference. But yes, it doesn't have to be super expensive. And if you look at the cost, for all these other foods, and then, it's just like people going to Starbucks and ordering 2 coffees. You can literally, you can get a couple pounds of ground beef for $7-8.
Christ. Every time I go to Starbucks with my wife, it's $30. It's like Starbucks is, if you cut Starbucks out of the way, you can eat well for the day.
Absolutely.
That's good stuff, Doc. Again, our platform, we're 3 big guys. And so what we talk about is, obviously we speak from experience, but there's always the people that will tell us, hey, you don't know what you're talking about. The medical field says this. And so talk to us a little bit more about, we touched on in the beginning, was the fact that there's the medical field and doctors in general, they really are not schooled on a lot of this stuff. So a lot of information that people get from the medical field is really kind of pointing them in the wrong direction.
Well, again, you have to consider the perspective of the physician. Most physicians, they don't really know much about nutrition. Don't go to a doctor for nutrition advice. I don't go to a doctor to teach me how to lift weights. you know better than that, right? But what they're going to see is they're going to look at risk factors, and they're going to say, well, we think cholesterol is a risk factor for heart disease, and therefore do whatever it takes to lower that risk factor. But they don't have a very good sense of, like how to measure things. What is over? You say, well, again, if I were to say, what's going to make me a good bodybuilder, or what's going to make me a strong power lifter or a strongman competitor, there's going to be like 20 or 30 things you're going to put together. You're not going to rely on just one thing. If somebody said, hey, I get 8 hours of sleep and that helps me be a strongman, you're not going to just only get 8 hours of sleep. That's not, you're not going to be playing on the world's strongest man stage just because you slept 8 hours a day. You got to look at all it. Same thing with risk. It's like data, but there's all these other things that go into that. And the more important thing is, like I said, if I'm worried about my heart, let me look at my heart. There's tests where you can do that. You can get anybody over age of 45 wants to look at maybe a coronary artery calcium scan. You can get that done for $75, $100. You don't even need a doctor to do it in most places. And they'll tell you how much plaque is in your heart, how much calcium. I had mine done at age 52 after eating a bunch of meat for years and years and years and 2 years on a strict carnivore diet, 0. Completely clean arteries. And I think that's something that we have to sort of realize. There's risk factors and then there's actual disease. If you can measure actual disease, it's far better to do that. That tells you what's actually going on, not what may happen. Because a lot of people will say, well, you shouldn't lift weights because, when you're old, you're going to be all arthritic and beaten up. And, how long you guys, Nick, how long have you been lifting for? God, 34, 40 years, I'm sure. Same thing, John, and came out.
Yeah, 30.
Yeah. So, I've been lifting for 42 years. Man, I'm good. Like I said, it's just like there's people that just don't know any better. They're just talking nonsense.
Well, here's the other thing. Whether you lift weights or not, you're going to end up that way anyway. You're going to end up old and arthritic no matter what you do. And that's what people don't seem to get either. But I'd rather have a lot of muscle mass on my body that can take the pressure off of joints in my spine and everything else that can handle all that, instead of it all being put directly on those things.
Well, I'll talk specifically about arthritis because I'm an orthopedic guy. That's what I used to replace knees and shoulders and hips and all that stuff. And it's interesting. And your point is well taken. It's like I had a friend of mine who he had some low back issues, and his solution was, well, having weak legs is not going to make that any better. So, he kept training and getting stronger and getting stronger legs. And absolutely, we know that, muscles provide stabilization to the joint. Like when we look at the knee, the things that stabilize the knee, the shape of the condyles of the knee, bones themselves, and then the ligaments, and then the menisci, but then the muscles are secondary stabilizers. So that'll help with stability. Interestingly, we used to think, or many of us still do, that arthritis, particularly osteoarthritis, is this wear and tear. If you put a lot of wear and tear in your joints, they're going to wear out and they're going to fall apart and you're going to get arthritis. But it's really turning out it's more biology. And so what we often see is if you are chronically inflamed, diet has a role there. You're going to end up producing these inflammatory cytokines produced by the synoviocytes, which are cells that line the joints, and you end up damaging your joints. And it's just, because I would see, who would I see when I was doing knee replacements? I wasn't seeing like bodybuilders and strength athletes and guys coming in and for their knee replacement. Who was I seeing? I was seeing fat 50-year-old women, all these fat women that never did a damn thing in their life, and they just got fat and their knees wore out. And why was that? Because it's a metabolic problem. You're basically just driving this inflammation, which tears your joints up. So I don't think it's necessarily inevitable, but to your point, you would rather carry some muscle mass so that you can offload those joints regardless. So, I tell people, even if you have an injury, you need to be able to figure out how to train that joint and that muscle group. You still have to figure it out. You still need to do it.
Yeah, 100%. I love it. These are, pearls, Doc, absolute pearls. So what would you say to the person that says, my doctor told me I'm not supposed to eat red meat anymore? They said it's unhealthy. So how do you approach that person? Obviously, because they're going to listen to their doctor. What do you say to that person?
I would say find a new doctor. that's what I tell them. knows what's up. But I think, you have to dig down specifically and say, well, why is that? Why are you concerned about that? And then if you say, well, I think it's going to cause heart disease or whatever. And then you just start to, you just have to pick that apart. You have to be your own advocate. And you have to educate yourself. I'm happy to go to a doctor and say you're full of shit because, and this is why, and these are my 20, I do this for a living. I've been studying nutrition for the last 10 years, specifically around meat. And but not everybody has the opportunity to do that. So I think you just have to, you might make it easier yourself. Fortunately, in the United States, you usually have the luxury of switching to a different doctor. And there's a lot of doctors out there that are starting to kind of figure it out, but most still don't. Most still think red meat is a problem. And I've converted many of them, thousands of them. In fact, they'll message me and say, hey dude, I totally get it. I'm telling my patients the same thing you are, and they're getting healthier. And so it's going to be an uphill battle, but again, remember your doctor works for you. He is your employee. He is a consultant for you, but you're the CEO of your body, and you need to say, okay, thank you. And I thank him. Hey, thanks for your concern. I'll take it under consideration. And then you do what makes you healthiest. And you sort of say, well, what do I want out of my life? Do I, but when they scare you, like, well, in 30 years, you might get cancer. Well, shit. You can make anybody. That's not an argument. In 30 years, we all be freaking living under, Chinese communism. I don't know. What the heck? It's kind of like, give me a concrete today answer. And this is the thing I always go, we're arguing about what diet's going to make you live the longest. And I straight up tell them, I have no idea. I don't think anybody knows. What I do know is I can take people that are unhealthy, they're sick, they're overweight, they're diabetic, they're depressed, and make them not that anymore. And that should be my role as a physician. And if we focus on that, getting people unsick now, today, the future will take care of itself. And you just got to keep doing the things that work for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a kind of an interesting question for you, Doc. And it's fun, but I think there might be some interesting information you may give us. So knowing this whole timeline of, food and, misinformation and all this kind of thing, if you had the opportunity, because you talked about, helping people understand and live a healthier lifestyle through food, if you got to go jump in a time machine and go back somewhere in the timeline of the human race, there's got to be some sort of a tipping point where you say, okay, if the crossroad didn't take a right and it took a left, where would you go back? Would you change the timeline of health and food to bring our current society to a better place with health?
Well, I mean, you could go back to 1917 when we created the American Dietetic Association. So this is the beginning of nutrition science, basically formally. And most people don't know this, but this was created by basically a Seventh-day Adventist group that started this thing. It was, I'm forgetting the name of the gal right now, but Ellen White was might have been Ellen G. White, I think, was the one that started all this. She was a Seventh-day Adventist, and then I can't remember the name of her disciple that started. And from the beginning, for they don't know, the Seventh-day Adventists who are, in Loma Linda, California is one of their kind of headquarters. They believe passionately that this Garden of Eden diet, this vegetarian diet, is the route to, holiness and, anything. And, you go back to, John Harvey Kellogg and these guys where they were, they were basically, red meat is the root of all evil. It leads you to have lusty thoughts and, masturbation and all this stuff. And they were literally.
Well, that's my problem. That's why I was such a horny little guy. I was eating
but it's true. I mean, it's true. I mean, it actually does cause you to work better. But I mean, I think if you could go back and say, okay, we're going to start nutrition science from not a religious perspective, but just from a purely scientific perspective, and just ask the right question, and I think the problem is, again, I keep thinking we don't ask the right questions. And, we have this, again, I mean, nutrition in for the last 12,000 years, again, if you believe in sort of an evolutionary model, and man has been around for a while, and we had this evolutionary process, it's very clear. I mean, we all understand there were hunter-gatherers and then we were farmers. I mean, regardless of when you think man began. And the data is pretty compelling that once we dropped it a grain-based agricultural society, it allowed for some great things. It allowed for civilizations. We no longer had to wander as nomads, so we could collect together. We could grow a civilization. We could share ideas. Technology could develop from that. But at the same time, our health took a turn for the worse collectively. Individually, we all individually got sicker. We ended up, most people don't know this, but the human brain actually shrunk about 150 cc's during the transition, from, early.
Really?
We went from 1500 cc's to 1350 on average.
Crazy.
So the human brain has actually gone down. And there's reason people think that. Now, some people speculate it's because the quality of nutrition got worse. We just ended up eating a mostly grain-based diet, which is kind of limiting in the nutrition it provides. Other people think that, because we no longer had this very complicated survival situation where you had to figure out how to get your hunt, and it's very challenging cognitively to just everything's provided. And you fast forward 12,000 years later, and in order for us to eat and survive, all you have to do literally is know how to click a mouse. I mean, it's like you can get Uber Eats to deliver food to you, so it's so easy. So our brains are probably smaller and smaller as we speak because we're not using them for anything. And so
it's definitely factual. Look at the in terms of the cell phone. Back before you had a cell phone in your hands, you used to know like 20 different phone numbers.
Yeah.
I can't even remember.
A lot more.
Yeah, we are becoming the eyeless fish with our dependence upon technology. And, you see people they want to stick neural implants in our brains, and we got all these crazy World Economic Forum and all these people talking about we're gonna all this transhumanism stuff. And I get this is the interesting thing, because you have so many people that are miserable in their day-to-day existence. I mean, they're in pain, they hurt, weak. I mean, life just sucks for them. And you're like, hey, let's plug you into the freaking metaverse and give you a neuro implant. And they're happy. They're like, well, I feel better this way, because the real world sucks. So I want to go live in fantasy world. And, there's people that are sign up. There's people they're like me. I'm ready. I'm ready to go. And it's just,
it's life is not Ready Player One.
Right. Well, some people want it to be that way.
Yeah. So I mean, that sounds like there's a couple of turning points there. But when we started to mass produce grain, sounds like that was a pretty clear line in the sand. Yeah.
There was definitely, you can definitely see the evidence that humans took a turn for the worse when it came to our human health. I mean, like I said, brains got smaller. Our teeth got worse. Our bones got weaker. We got shorter and smaller as humans in general. I mean, it's interesting, you know, when we look at average human populations, it's kind of interesting. So if you go back, like around the world today, like the tallest people in the world, it's argued about where they are, but it's kind of Denmark, it's Central Europe and like Croatia, and then some areas in the Nilotic African region. So I was just in Dubai, and I ran into the guy who was working the front door at the hotel where he was at. He was a big dude. He was like 6'9", huge guy, about 320. And I was asking where he's from. He said, I'm from the South Sudan. And he's part of the Dinka tribe, which are these Nilotic Africans, which are just big, tall people. And what do? They're pastoralists. They live on, you know, milk and meat, basically. And we see that throughout history. In fact, so if you go back, you know, the average population right now, I think 6'1" on average. You know, like the average American male is about 5'9.5". And so 6'1" is a pretty big difference. A pretty big jump, you know, from an average population. But if you go back 30,000 years ago, there was this population called the Gravettians, and they lived in kind of Central Europe. And what they did is they were specialist mammoth hunters, and that's what they did. They went out and killed mammoths and ate mammoth meat all day, and they were the biggest people in the world. So these guys were like jack guys walking around at 6'7", 6'9", kind of average. And this is what the human species potential is. And so everywhere in the world where you see these really small populations, generally it's because the food has been poor quality. And so we see them through much of that, you know, parts of, you know, Southeast Asia particularly. We see these stunting different parts of Africa where the nutrition is poor. People are just smaller. And so, you know, you can just see where whenever you add animal nutrition to any of those places, it's dramatic. We see this, and we're seeing it in China right now. China now, as they were getting more, you know, more wealth, they're getting taller and taller. You know, Japan, you know, back late 1800s, the emperor was pissed off because he couldn't get enough people to join the army to make the minimum height. And the minimum height for a male back then was 4'11". 4'11" was a minimum height to get in the military, and he couldn't fill out a military. And they were all vegetarian. You know, Japan was like vegetarian 200 years ago. So they started bringing meat back in, and so they started getting taller and taller populations. And now you get, like in China, like the same thing. You get the Yao Mings and the giant people coming from Asia because they're improving the quality of their diet.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Makes sense.
Yeah, that's.
You guys there? Got quiet.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. I had a little brain fart there with the service. Anyway, yeah, that's really interesting there, Doc. I mean, one more time, what the mammoth hunters? What were they called again?
They're called the Gravettians. So Gravettian. You can look them up, Gravettian mammoth hunters, and you just read about it. It's pretty cool. It's kind of an interesting, interesting population. But yeah, we were eating those big mammoths. You know, it's interesting, and people think, you know, well, people were like, well, eat meat in desperation. You know, this is, if you listen to vegans, well, we only eat it because we had to, right? You know, and it's like, well, why did we stop when we developed agriculture? Why does every single population, even the people that live like the Bolivian, you know, indigenous tribes that live in the middle of a friggin' fruit forest still hunt? You know, why do they do that? You know, because they know they figure this stuff out. We need, you know, it's so important. But,
absolutely.
The thing is, you know, elephants actually are relatively easy to kill, which most people would think, wow, they're big animals. But, you know, humans are pretty crafty. I mean, we are the best hunters on the planet, you know, and it's the other thing that's interesting is humans are the most geographically diverse species on the planet. We occupy every single place on Earth with the exception of Antarctica. And there's no other animal that does that. And the only other animal that comes close are wolves. And what do wolves eat? I mean, they're basically, carnivorous.
True.
And so, you know, and again, I'm not saying, you know, I clearly, we read my book. I say humans are omnivores. We are omnivorous, but we are opportunist, carnivorous, facultative carnivores. We do well on meat. I mean, the more high quality nutrition in our diet, the easier it is. I mean, it's like, you know, if you look at, like for instance, a lot of people say, well, look at a gorilla, you know, they're 350 pounds and they're jacked and all they do is eat leaves all day. It's true. But, you know, if you look about a gorilla will eat between 50 and 75 pounds of food a day, 50 and 75 pounds.
Oh my God, that's not sustainable.
Right. And they, you know, and they're about the same size as Nick, you know, I mean, Nick, you're probably what do you well, I mean, if you imagine if you had to eat 75 pounds of food a day, right? I mean,
I couldn't do that.
They literally spend 80% of their waking hours chewing. 80% of every moment they're awake, they're chewing food. and then they're crapping and then they're recycling the crap because they're not getting up B12. That's a different topic, but we don't. We're more efficient. We're much more efficient at that. So.
Yeah, I love it.
I'm only
Doc,
you're like a small silverback, a medium-sized silverback.
That's it. So, Doc, we've had you on here for an hour. We really appreciate your time, but I got one more question for you as we kind of wrap this up. And this was such a great experience. I mean, we're going to definitely have you come back when you've got the time.
Oh yeah.
But you've uncovered such great information. You've given our listeners such great pearls to think about. So, if you have if you could kind of give us like a thesis, give us a message that our listeners could kind of take from this. If you had to give them one thing to run with, what would it be?
Yeah, I think that you should prioritize lean mass and strength as a marker of health. I think that is probably, I think if you want to measure one thing that's going to associate with better health, better function outcomes, and then you figure out how to get there. And then when you figure out how to get there, you'll probably reach a similar conclusion that it's eating a lot of high quality protein, getting in the gym. And then, the rest of it stuff is, kind of fringe around the ends. But I mean, I think that's lean mark is metabolic gold. Lean mass is metabolic gold. You should preserve it. You should cling to it. You should fight for it. It's worth, it's just going to be such a net positive for your health overall.
Yeah, I like it. Well, before we wrap this up, Nick, do you have anything, last thoughts for Dr. Baker?
No, man, this was very educational. I hope our listeners learned a lot today, and just thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for doing this, guys. And I appreciate having a chance to talk to different audiences. And I got to go hunt you guys down on Instagram, follow you guys, and get inspire you out there and train hard. So thank you, guys.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Nick.
thank you.
All right.
Cool. I got a lot of questions, but it'll lead to another half hour to an hour. So let's do this again. Let's do round two.
That's it.
So,
that's it.
Okay.
Yeah. I can
Cool.
talk about that. Yeah.
That's it. Well, Doc,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I'm a huge fan, Doc. I mean, ever since we first met. Did I lose you, Doc? You still there?
I think I'm still here. Yeah, I'm just trying to figure. I get to do another. I get to do
no
another
worries.
podcast.
I was just saying I'm a huge fan. I want to thank you for your time, and you gave our listeners some great information today. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you next time that we have you come on the show. Right, thank you, Doc.
Thanks so much. Thanks, guys. Good seeing you guys.
Thank you.
Right on. Well, there you have it, everyone. There's another edition of Legends of Iron. We sucked every minute we could out of the Doc. We'll get it back again sometime soon for you. He had a lot of great stuff for you guys to digest. Hopefully helps you see things a little bit more clearly on your journey. Bottom line is we're here to make you the best version of yourselves. We'll see you next time. There's another edition of Legends of Iron. Legends of Iron is brought to you by Muscle Mix.
Eating like a bodybuilder is not cheap. I mean, have you seen the recent cost of steaks lately? Thankfully, I'm able to get all my meals in and hit my macros for just a fraction of the price with Carnivore Lean Meal, Muscle's newest innovative whole food meal replacement.
Compare Carnivore Lean Meal to a typical bodybuilding meal. Carnivore Lean Meal stacks up in protein and carbs with none of the fat, but a carnivore shake is only about $3 per meal.
Get my 6 meal in. This is what I use right here. This is meal number 6. It's my Carnivore Lean Meal. It's a combination of carbs combined with protein. It's actually made from real sweet potatoes and white potatoes, so can't beat that. Tastes awesome. Love that product. And to top it all off, guys, it's lactose free and sugar free. Stop overpaying for your meals and eat clean with Carnivore Lean Meal. It's better than any meal you can cook yourself at a fraction of the price.